Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening from Systemic Diversity and Inclusion Group. This is an SDIG live online live event and presented by our um, president and founder of SDIG, Dr. Joseph Nwoye. And today's guest is Miss Getrude Matshe. She's a powerhouse. Dr. Nai. Now it's your turn to just introduce our wonderful guest that we have today, Ms. Getrude Matshe. And we are good to go now.
Okay. Good afternoon to all of you. I don't know what to say about the lady we have today. She's an extraordinary. And I therefore think that the best thing I can do is to have her introduce herself, and then we could have a couple of questions. And then from there, we can go to the audience questions, which is always very important. And then we will close. So without saying any further, Gertrude, could you please introduce yourself to this audience?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's an absolute honor to be here today. My full name is Getrude Matshe. I was born in Zimbabwe, and I have lived in New Zealand for the last 21 years, and just recently moved to live in Australia last year. So I want to share with you today, cultivating a culture of competence and inclusion. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I have put together. So Samaya, if you could share that, we'll go through it. I will share what has been my life experience in this world. And then we'll open up for a Q&A session where I would love to get to know all of you, any questions you might have based on this presentation as well. So I won't spend a lot of time on myself, but I think for the first 30 to 40 minutes, I will share my journey and my story, and then we will open up for a Q&A session. So I'm not sure if I have control over the PowerPoint or if you will, Samaya. So if you could start that. Thank you. You can go on to the next slide. So today, more than ever, organizations are investing in efforts to foster inclusive environments. And there is no shortage of studies that support the intentional efforts around inclusion can yield higher employment engagement, create a culture of innovation, and ultimately impact on the organization's bottom line. So as I said, my name is Getrude Matshe. I'm the CEO and founder of the Diversity Connector and the global curator for the HerStoryCircle movement. And I call myself a serial social entrepreneur who's on a mission to change the world, especially the world of women and children, one woman at a time, one child at a time. For more than 21 years, I've been supporting leaders and organizations in their efforts to create transformative and sustainable solutions to equity and inclusion. One thing that I've learned over these years is that inclusion doesn't just happen. It takes work, it takes intention, and it takes skill. We call that skill cultural competence. And it refers to our ability to recognize, engage, adapt across cultural differences. It also refers to our ability not only to understand and bridge across different cultures, but to understand our own culture, our own density, and our own worldview, and those values and influences that shape who we are and what we believe. And once you jump into this journey of understanding greater cultural competence and apply the concepts and principles and practices to your workplace and your life. Enriching relationships and do your part in creating a more equitable and inclusive environment in the workplace. We can go to the next slide. So who am I? I was born in a small village called Wedza on the eastern highlands of Zimbabwe and Mozambique. It is the kind of place where you were born there, you will die there, you'll amount to absolutely nothing. It's a village that to this day in 2022 has no electricity, no running water. But my biggest gift was that I was gifted to two amazing parents who realized the value of educating their children. My father was the visionary. My dad got a scholarship in 1967, the year that I was born, to go and study in London through the Catholic Church. And I remember when I was about 5 or 6, my dad would make me do chores and pay me to do the chores by putting money in his pockets. My job during the weekends was to go into his wardrobe, fold all his clothes, polish his shoes, and make everything neat. And one day I was doing my work and I found an old pair of shoes at the bottom of the wardrobe, and I was about to put them in the bin. And my father walked in and said, "What are you doing with my shoes? Those shoes are magic." And I said, "They're old, I'm throwing them away." He said, "No, no, no, no. Let me show you something." And he sat me on his lap and he pulled out an old photograph from his wallet of himself standing on the steps of the Colosseum in Rome in 1967. He pointed to the shoes in the photograph and he said, "These are the same shoes." Then he picked up the shoes, pulled out the newspapers that were covering the soles of these shoes. And that newspaper dated back to 1967, the year that I was born. He said, "These shoes are magic." And in this photo, he was standing on the steps of the Colosseum in Rome. My father got on a flight to go to Europe with a pair of shoes that had no soles. He couldn't afford a new pair of shoes. And he said, "If you can dream and put in your head anything you want can be reality." And that was the worldview that shaped my life. I grew up with no sense of limitation in terms of where I was from, what resources I had. My dad was the visionary who showed me that anything is possible in life. And I still have those pair of shoes. I have now created a sculpture out of them. When my father died, I inherited that pair of shoes. My mother, on the other hand, was the entrepreneur. So when my dad got his scholarship, he took his young wife with him. My mother studied to become a nurse. It took them 3 years for them to raise money for me and my sister to join them. So I was 9 months old when they left Zimbabwe, or Rhodesia at the time. By the time we went to join them, I was 3 years old. And we lived in London, in Clapham Common, until I was 6. I then went back to the UK when I was 19 to get my first degree. But my mother was the entrepreneur. My mother could sell snow to the Eskimos. She was the most amazing saleswoman. We were taught from the age of 6 how to make things, to sell, to raise money for our own school fees. I went to all white schools my whole life, not because my parents were rich, but they valued education, and they knew that if they could give us the best education, it would unlock the door to abundance and wealth. So I was taught how to knit, how to sew, how to crochet, how to fabric paint, how to do batik. And we had to make things that we would sell on the weekends to raise money for school fees. I was the younger of my mother's 2 children at the time, so she would take me with her when we had to go and sell. And we had to cross the racial line and go to all the white neighborhoods. So before Zimbabwe had independence, We were under the British rule. Whites and blacks didn't mix. And we would go to all the white neighborhoods to sell our wares. And I distinctly remember one day we had traveled on a bicycle for 50 kilometers and we had sold nothing. It was late afternoon. I was hungry. I was thirsty. I just wanted to go home. And I said, Mom, let's go home. This isn't working. And she stopped her bike in the middle of the street. And she said, you have to remember when you sell, people have got two choices. They can say yes, or they can say no. If they say no, you thank them for their time. You knock on the next door. That's where you'll make your sale. And like magic, as she said this, we knocked on the door of a beautiful house. It had these old colonial pillars. And the lady of the house opened the door. She must have seen how hungry and thirsty I was because she invited us into the house. And I had never been in a white person's house before. We lived in a black neighborhood. Blacks and whites didn't mix. The first thing this woman did is she went into the kitchen, came back with a glass of juice and a slice of cake. I still remember that slice of cake to this day. She made me sit down to eat and she started talking to my mom and she asked my mother why she was selling. And my mother said, my girls go to the convent. Now, the Dominican convent was the most expensive school in the country. My sister and I were the first two Black children in that school. She was puzzled and she said, why? Why don't you send the children to the township school with all the other Black children? And my mom said, because my girls need a good education. If they're educated, they will get out of poverty. And at the age of 6, I realized what that meant. I realized that if I studied hard, I would get out of the situation we were in. That woman went on to buy everything that was in our basket. And when we were walking home, my mother said to me, always meet people where they are. That woman was a good person. And there's two kinds of people in this world. There's good people and there's bad people. Don't ever judge anyone by the color of their skin. And I learned to take people on face value, not to make assumptions, not to bring my baggage of my life experiences into any conversation I have with strangers. And effectively, I have met the most fascinating people on the planet. I have been to 56 countries. I've had amazing experiences gifted to me by people who look nothing like me. And I base it on that particular story, in that I always meet people where they are and give them an opportunity to show up. I then became a first-generation coder in 1986. My father had lost his job. The bank was about to repossess our home. And my dad helped me gain self-confidence by putting me and my sister on a bus every school holiday and sending us to the city to apply for jobs and not take the jobs. My father would say the corporate world is white. You will need to stand in front of a white person and speak. Just go and practice. And that particular school holiday, I had 3 job offers. I could have been an air traffic controller, a pilot, a nurse, a COBOL programmer, or an air hostess. Now, I had been leaning towards the travel because I loved exploring different countries. I was going to fly out of Africa if it meant that I flew the plane myself. Then my father said to me, technology is the future. He didn't even know what a computer was. He said it's a combination of an adding machine and a typewriter. So he was an accountant. He knew how to use typewriters and adding machines. And he channeled me to be a first-generation coder. And I got a job with a London Rhodesia company. And I programmed computers in BASIC, Pascal, and COBOL back in the day. And it changed the trajectory of my life. It meant that I was always the only Black person in every organization I've worked in throughout my whole career. And I have based everything I have done off using technology because of it and done it very successfully. I was a terrible programmer. I'm a people person. I loved engaging with people. And after 2 years, my boss realized this gift And he channeled me to do more courses in systems analysis and design and project management. And the rest of my 15-year career was as a project manager and systems analyst. I left Zimbabwe in 1994 and moved to South Africa. My ex-husband wanted to study to become an obstetrician. He was a doctor. So he enrolled to go back to university to get his master's degree. I was the breadwinner working as a systems analyst. My first job in South Africa was in the manufacturing business in clothing. And I worked for a company that actually designed all the suits for Nelson Mandela. So that took me on a different curve. I was used to business systems and now I was in manufacturing. I then decided to go back to university and get my first degree. And I majored in business and industrial psychology and got a business studies degree. I worked for MTN and Old Mutual, the largest insurance company in South Africa. And I was the system support manager for MTN, which is the largest telecommunications company in Africa. And I watched the power of cell phone technology as we crossed the continent, bringing cell phones to countries like Nigeria, Uganda. We went all the way up north, and it was fascinating to watch the transformation of communities using cell phone technology. And I'll come back to that a bit later in terms of what I'm doing now. We went back to Zimbabwe in 1999 to find our economy in ruins. Zimbabwe had the highest inflation in the world. Computer systems had crashed. Computer companies withdrew. I couldn't get a job as a systems analyst, so I was stuck at home with the children. My husband was working for a government hospital, earning $125 a month for a family of 5. So we weren't coping. So we decided to leave Zimbabwe and find a country to immigrate to. Tried to come to the United States, that failed, and then ended up in New Zealand 21 years ago. I worked for a company that designed hospital software called Database Management Support. Got a job as a systems analyst, got promoted to project management level. My husband couldn't find work in New Zealand when we moved, so he got a job in Australia and commuted and came home once a month for the first year. But I was a mom with 3 children ranging from 3 to 12, and I was losing it. I decided to go into business so I could find a way to look after my children and work from home. And I fell back to my artistic skills, started painting fabric, making things to sell, had a small shop that sold hand-painted fabrics and cushions, and that shop failed. New Zealand has a population of 5 million people. Unless you're selling to the sheep, we have 16 million sheep, you can't make money from product. So my first business failed completely, but I then learned that if I went into the service industry instead, I would succeed. So I registered a company called Medical Recruiters of New Zealand because I saw the need for doctors when my husband was job hunting. There were hundreds of vacancies for doctors. So I first of all wrote back to Africa to some of our friends, told them the opportunity that was there. 5 of my husband's friends said yes, they would come to New Zealand. And I placed 5 doctors and made $125,000 in my first 3 months of business and hit on my first $1 million business idea. I then started stalking Peter Jackson when he was making Lord of the Rings. As an African storyteller, I wanted to learn more about digital storytelling. I went to a presentation where he was talking about how they made the film, plucked up the courage to ask if I could act in his next film. And they were casting for the movie King Kong. And they were looking for African Americans to take part in one scene, 350 people. And because I was working and volunteering with the refugee service, I knew a lot of African people. I was really connected with the African community in Wellington. And I presented a business case to bring African extras who took part in the movie King Kong and also in the movie Avatar with James Cameron. And I created the largest database for ethnic minority people for film and advertising and turned that into a business as well. GM Global Investments is a property investing company that I built from scratch with $500 valued in 2015 at 4.5 million. I then created Walk on the Wild Side Tours, which was a tourism company that supported my philanthropic work. My foundation in Africa is called Africa Thrive. And in the last 21 years, I have helped pay for education for over 25,000 children in my community in the village that we are from. We pay for school fees, we pay for food, we pay for medication. Most of these kids were HIV positive, parents had died from AIDS, and they were part of my extended family. My grandmother had 11 children, she had 34 grandchildren, 19 of my first cousins died of HIV-related diseases. There were 49 orphaned kids on my side of the family, another 40 on my ex-husband's side. So I created a tourism company, bringing people to Zimbabwe to go on a walk on the wild side, and that business funds my philanthropic efforts on the African continent. I also created women's cooperatives, getting women out of poverty with small amounts of money, teaching them how to sell their products online. And I have gone back to scaling that through my current business, which is called the Diversity Connector. I started publishing books and teaching people how to write their own stories. I created a women's speaking platform called the HerStoryCircle. We have conferences, online summits. We have a podcast, a magazine, and an anthology series of books that we publish as well. So that's me in a nutshell. Like I said, I'm a serial social entrepreneur on a mission to make money to change the lives of women in marginalized communities around the world. You can go on to the next slide. Let's go on and talk about what is cultural competence and why is it important. It refers to our ability to recognize, engage, and adapt across cultural differences. And it also refers to our ability to not only understand and bridge across other cultures, but to also understand our own culture, our own diversity, our own worldview, and those values and influences that shape who we are and what we believe. So I shared a little bit about my story and what my worldview is and how I came upon this worldview. It was based on my parents, how they brought me up, how they got me to perceive the world, and it has really influenced everything I've done in my life. Go on to the next slide. So think a little bit about your worldview. What shapes you? What is your own culture? Because unless you understand your own culture, you can't understand anybody else's. Next slide. So whether we recognize it or not, we all have a worldview. And this is the lens that we see the world. It frames how we judge, how we interpret what we see as right or wrong, and what we deem as normal, culture, identity. And it's the bias that influences our own worldview and the impact on how we engage in the workplace. Go on to the next one. Next slide. So let's have a little quiz. They say that millennial men in the United States are more likely than not, than baby boomers, men, in accepting women as leaders. Is this fact or fiction? Please type in the chat whether you think this is fact or fiction. We have fact, we have fiction. Thanks, Teresa. Thanks, Charlotte. Just type your view. Is this fact or fiction? Thanks, Danielle. She says fact. Thank you, Dr. Joseph. Fact. Let's go on to the next slide. Thanks, Tricia. Fact. Robert, fact. So this is actually fiction. Everyone has their biases. Not many millennial males believe in female leadership. Everybody has their biases, and it's based on understanding of, again, cultural competence. We could go on to the next one. Another quiz, fact or fiction? More than 3 out of 4 Latinx employers expend energy repressing parts of their personas in the workplace. Fact or fiction? Please give me your contribution there. Thank you, Charlotte. Fact. Jade, fact. Keep going. Samaya, fact. Next one. Robert, fact. So give us the answer, Samaya. It is fact. One study has found that 76% of Latinx employees extend energy repressing parts of their personas in the workplace. They are covering or downplaying who they are to modify their appearance, body language, communication style, and leadership presence. And this can be detrimental to productivity. One's capability to innovate and truly bring the whole of ourselves to the workplace is imperative. Let's go on to the next one. Last part of our quiz. Based on survey of global leaders, only 7% think they have the skills needed to manage in a global environment. Fact or fiction? Give me your answers in the chat. Fact, thank you, Jade. Fiction, Charlotte. Fact, Robert. Fiction, Dr. Joseph. Okay, let's have the answer. It is fact. So the McKinsey Quarterly cites a study that 76% of senior executives said that they believe their organizations need to develop global leadership capacities, but only 7% think that they're currently doing it effectively. So thank you for playing that game. You know, there are things that we hear about that we think are real and are not real. And that was just a little illustration, again, about cultural competency. Let's go on to the next slide. So this is a business case for cultural competence. In order for us to attract and retain an increasing diverse workforce and engage in diverse communities and consumers in our marketplace, we must be able to recognize, understand, and adapt across those differences. The more culturally competent you are, the better position you will be to contribute to organizational success. The next slide. Now we're going to go just to explore the framework of inclusion. What is inclusion? Next slide. Okay, so this is a study that shows that if there is low belonging and low value of uniqueness, people feel excluded. And again, I'm going to demonstrate by the story of my life. When I was in school, I was always the only Black child in the room. I didn't look like any of my peers. I wasn't accepted by any of my peers. Nobody would play with me. Nobody would talk to me. And I've always been on the outside of the main group when I was a student, both in university and in high school. But in primary school and high school, it was really heightened because little children can be very, very cruel. When it came to going to university, I learned to assimilate. And that's when you have a sense of low value and high belonging. I felt I belonged because I had managed to pass my high school diploma. I had qualified to be accepted in that university, but still my uniqueness was not something that was valued. So I just tried to adapt. I tried to assimilate. I remember even changing the way I spoke. My accent would change depending on who I was talking to. And for those people who don't speak a second language, you have to understand that if English is not your first language, for you to understand other people, we lip read, we watch people's mouths. And for you to be understood, you actually have to change your accent for people to hear you. And I catch myself doing it a lot. Now I kind of have an accent that is a mixture of Shona, which is my mother tongue. I speak a bit of Afrikaans. I speak English, but depending on where I am, if I'm in the United States, like right now I'm in Minnesota, I morph and try and put on an American sounding accent so people can understand me. If I'm in the UK, my accent changes again. And it's just a way for me to cope, a way for me to assimilate the environment that I'm in. So if you don't speak a second language, you won't understand this. But if you do, I think you can relate to what I'm saying. In the bottom corner, we have differentiation. This is when you have a sense of high uniqueness and low belonging. And this is what I experienced when I lived in South Africa. Differentiation or tokenism is experienced in this environment. Post-apartheid South Africa, they introduced incentives for organizations to bring in diverse people. Affirmative action was at play, and if you're African American, you can relate to this in the United States, or if you're Hispanic. And what happened in South Africa is they preferred to bring in African immigrants from other African countries like Zimbabwe, Botswana, jobs in South Africa very, very easily. And it helped them tick the quota that they needed for representation for Black people. But they chose us only because we were willing to accept low pay rates. We were not militant and advocating for more rights. We were just grateful to have a job. So they filled their organizations with Black African immigrants who would not stir up and cause trouble. And what that did is it created conflict between South African Blacks and people of African descent from other African countries. That's when xenophobia became a huge problem in South Africa, and it still is now. It's very, very difficult to get a job in South Africa if you are a person of African descent. So tokenism was used. The best place you want any organization to exist in is where inclusion is fully understood. And this is where my diversity connector project comes in. Inclusion manifests in cultures where there is high value for uniqueness and a high sense of belonging. And I have to admit, in all of my work experiences, I never got this experience until I created my own organization. So the diversity connector strives to connect people who are diverse, who are unique, and find them opportunities in the corporate world where they can fit in, where their difference is valued, and they can be a full expression of who they are, to bring in creativity and diversity into the workplace. So we can go on to the next slide. We're almost finished with my presentation. So what is culture? Culture can be reflected in the way that we dress, in our clothing, the food that we eat, the music we listen to, the language that we speak. But in most organizations, culture is invisible and it's very, very subtle. Culture refers to the values of the organizations, the beliefs and the traditions that that organization follows. And we are taught by the groups that we belong to how to behave, how to act, and how to welcome people who are outsiders into the main groups as well. Next slide. More than that, we are taught these behaviors and ways to act around these values, beliefs, and traditions. And a lot of time, the culture of the organization is a set of unwritten rules that govern how we act, behave with regards to the beliefs and values. So think about your own organization. What are those things that you do that are not written down and passed on to your employees and your staff? It's not something we do very often. It is also the behavioral interpretation of how a group lives out its values in order to survive and thrive. So how is your organization going to exist and survive and thrive? And I think that is the last slide. Am I correct, Samaya? Or do I have more?
Three more left.
3 more, okay. So the last 3 slides are going to talk about cultural competence and what it stands for. Number 1, it is a continuous learning process to develop knowledge, appreciation, and acceptance and skills. Next slide. Number 2, it's also the ability to discern cultural patterns. You have to be able to tune into what you're currently doing. And this is really where I'm talking about the things that aren't written down. And number 3, it's how to use these cultural patterns to solve problems, make decisions, and resolve conflict in your organization or workplace. So thank you so much for listening to this part of my presentation. I think this is now an opportunity for us to open up the floor for dialogue, for questions, for comments from all of you. And I don't know if we can have a gallery view so I can see the faces of everybody.
Sure. Doctor, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. If you could, please ask whatever question you can ask. I think this is a phenomenal. This is probably the best we've gotten because it goes through every possible thing you could think of when you think about diversity. We are all shaped by our different environments. So because of that, we carry our own baggages, and she identified all of them. So our job now is to understand that. And when we understand that, we have our baggages. So other people have their baggages. The question then becomes, how do we move forward? So the question I will have is, the one Getrude has addressed, but I will just ask for purposes of those that came late. If she could give us pointers as to how do we engage ourselves in fostering this inclusion. I didn't say diversity, I mean inclusion, because diversity is what organizations used to camouflage and individuals used to hide their own uniqueness, and ultimately both the organizations and individuals lose. So how could we do that, and how could we bridge that gap that exists among individuals as well as organizations and individuals?
I love a quote that I read once that said, inclusion in organization is like being invited to the dance, being invited to an event and being asked to dance. Now, I love it because when I dance with an African rhythm. I bring my style of dancing to the dance floor. So even if it's a Western piece of music, I won't dance it like a European person, if that makes sense. So when you include people, you allow them to be who they are. You allow them to be a full expression of who they are. And this can be done in organizations by creating events where you bring in people to share food, for example. Get everybody to cook a meal from their home country and get the others in the organizations to taste that food and experience that food. That's a really good example of inclusion, because until we start understanding each other, we don't quite know who we are as people. So bringing people to express themselves in a cultural way and experience their culture is a beautiful way of including people in an organization. So really creating the space for them to show up. Sometimes it could be dress in a cultural way day for your organization once a month. People can come wearing their Indian clothes, their African clothes, something that represents their culture. So that is one way that could be done effectively in the workplace.
Questions from audience, please.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for coming, Gertrude. Okay, but at first thing when you started to talk about 1967, I was like, hey, that's the year I was born. And then I heard that's the year you were born too. And then I said, oh, she's wearing red and black, and so is Dr. Joseph. But that's because yesterday my country was 60th anniversary, and it's red and black are the colors. So I was like, yeah, this is all fixed. You know, and I actually teach intercultural communication skills. And I'm responsible for the diversity inclusion module of that course. So it was really nice to hear you. I mean, we had different opinions because we're the millennials, because I was saying that I have seen a major difference between the EU millennials as opposed to millennials from Africa and from the Caribbean. There's a different mindset I have realized in the culture. So that even that statement we make when we do it generally, we have to recognize the EUs are a class by themselves, you know, and I have experienced what you talked about. We try to say, bring your foodstuffs, but I always tell them, listen, I know if I bring my foodstuffs, I cook a lot in Belgium. And everyone is like, oh my God, your food is so spicy. And I was like, no, you mean my food is flavored. It's flavored. You people need to put some food flavor in your food. You know, and like I say, it's understanding the different aspects, recognizing the differences. And I totally get where you come from with the different accents that people have. So much so in my culture, when you go back home, my mom is always like, speak properly. You have a little accent, lose it. Because to them, we have a refrigerator accent, they call it, where people open the refrigerator, it gets cold, and they think they're in America or UK. But if I use my Caribbean dialect and tone in teaching, my students will not understand. They will, because we have this, as you hear it now, a little sing-song, right? So it is, and like I said with the diversity, a lot of people don't really understand diversity. And to me, diversity in many places is more seclusion rather than inclusion. They think they're diverse. I went to a seminar once, and the leader of it at a university was saying, we have done so much. And actually, she got an award, people. We have done so much for diversity at our university. We formed a group for those who are bisexual. We have a group for lesbians. We have a group for gays. We have a group for Black people. We have a group for Latinos. And I'm like, you just putting everybody in groups. That is not diversity. Why must I be classified by my color of my skin or my sexual identity? And like I tell people, when they ask things like in Belgium, there's a new thing that you can put male, female, prefer not to say. And I said to them, why, if I can tick prefer not to say, that means it's not even important. So why are you asking? That's the first thing in diversity. Remove everything that leads to people being separated for something else. You know, I mean, I can understand sometimes I'm talking to my mom and she calls me son, because my brothers are always around her. And I used to, every time she called me son, I grab her hand and I put it by my breast. I say, Moms, I'm female. But in that case, that is different. You know, that you can recognize, but again, we have to get things wrong. Asking me what's the color of my skin when I'm filling out a form, why does it matter? Because as I said to Dr. Joseph, we have to be careful, and I have to be careful here. I always tell people, I choose people based on what they bring to the table, what they bring. I don't look at, I want to have one white, one black, one, that is not how you do it. And that is what I think people miss, the diversity. And I love how you say, meet people where they are, get away from it. You know, just, and I love, because even in my school, they claim to be extremely diverse. And I love because everything they have, they must include me, and I know why, because I'm the only Black lecturer, so I understand. I mean, when they were giving out modules, they gave me diversity one to do because they said you're more comfortable with it. I was like, yeah, fine, you know, like. So I mean, I really enjoyed how you went around it and the way you did it. I mean, it's fantastic, you know.
Thank you.
I will be bothering you to come talk to my students in the future. Just know that, okay?
I would love to. I would love to.
We missed your question, though, Teresa. We missed your question.
I didn't have a question. I was just saying she was fantastic.
Okay, let's shift. Maybe a couple of questions more. We round up. One more. Okay, Robert, go please. You're muted, Robert.
I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
First, thank you for your fascinating and inspiring life story. I'm in Atlanta myself, and doing diversity training, I find out that I too have to code switch wherever I go across the country. And I was working in Tennessee and for 5 days in a row. So I bought 5 Van Heusen shirts, a brand name, in 5 different colors. And there's an exercise how they judge first impressions. And I was literally judged by the color of my shirt. I had a green shirt, they said I was Rod Stewart. I had a black shirt and they thought that was okay. So it was interesting how they made those preformed judgments based on their prejudices and of course my Southern accent, but I didn't sound like them. And so when I was in Tennessee, they asked where I was from. And I said, well, I'm from Northwest Alabama, but I live in Atlanta for 20, 30 years. And a man in the class goes, and these are 45 managers for a nuclear company. And he says, good thing you left Alabama because we kill faggots like you in Alabama. And in the class of 45, mostly men, 80% men, half of them laughed and half of them were appalled. And I had to de-escalate the situation, but it was a hostile environment. And it was deemed so by the federal government. But some of us, as a gay man, for example, and a person of color, we have to walk a very fine tightrope at times to be included, or we're automatically excluded. And I had not outed myself in this opening presentation, but rather they just saw it in my micro messaging, I suppose, or the flip of a wrist or an inflection of a word. So I'm with you. I understand you. Thank you for your inspiration. But how do we get past such hostile prejudices is my question.
Wow, thank you for sharing, Robert. I really appreciate that. It's amazing how people can just look at someone and judge. When I moved to New Zealand, the color is black. Everybody wears black. I was so depressed when I got there because in Africa, you only wear black if you're going to a funeral. And red is my power color. Red is the color that energizes me. I think education is the only key to breaking these barriers. We have to go into these hostile environments. Unfortunately, there's so many of them out there. When I worked in apartheid South Africa, post-apartheid, like I said, I was always the only Black woman in the room. My boss was interesting. So in South Africa, we had what was called the pass laws. So depending on the color of your skin, you couldn't work in Cape Town if you had my skin tone. Cape Town was a colored preferential area for people of mixed race. You needed a passport to work in Cape Town. Although you were South African, the only jobs for Black women You had to be the cleaner or you were the nanny who looked after the children. And my boss treated me that way. We would be sitting at a dining table, having a meeting. And when it was time for tea and coffee, he would look to me and say, Gertrude, it's time for tea and coffee. So it's all men. I'm the only woman there. I'm the only Black person at the table. My job is to be the servant or to look after the children. And my mother taught me how to kill people with kindness. I turned it into a joke. So I would cross my legs and say, yes, Jack, I take mine black with 2 sugars, thank you. And he would blush and go red and everybody would laugh. Yeah, with kindness. I didn't get angry. I turned it into a joke and it broke his cycle of behavior with humor. So we can find ways of addressing these hostile environments. Because if I took that home every day, where I was treated like a servant, I was at management level at that dining table, I wouldn't have survived in that environment. I would have quit my job within the first month. So we have to educate. Our job as minorities is to educate those around us who don't understand. It's to invite them into our spaces, invite them into our homes, our events. That's the only way. Unfortunately, education is the key that breaks a lot of discrimination and cycles of abuse in the workplace. So thank you for sharing. That was a really beautiful example. Appreciate you for sharing that with us today. We've got Charlotte. Charlotte is asking something.
Okay, Charlotte, go. Okay.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. I think it was very inspiring. And I'm listening to these stories, and I am too a minority from the perspective of being a woman. I've worked most of my career in the financial services sector and in fintech, always in technology and always the 5% only woman in the room with the request, oh, listening to people's off-colored, very off-colored jokes. So you develop a very thick skin over time. But I did want to ask a question. Do you actually think it's getting better? Or have you developed with age and maturity your way of coping with it? Because we talk about it and we say, yes, we need education. And I see those next generations. I'm doing quite a lot of mentoring in the entrepreneurial space. And oh, they sound so open-minded until they lose a privilege to someone else, whether that's a male or a gay or a trans or something. They make it sound as if it doesn't exist anymore, and as if we are, certainly as if I'm a relic that grew up and lived my whole professional career being the odd woman out or the odd one out. But actually, I'm not sure it's getting so much better. So what's the take? Do you see it where you are getting better?
Unfortunately, it's not. I think we learn to cope. We learn to find ways of developing that thick skin so we can survive. And I'm saying this because right now I've gone back into tech. I have just registered a tech startup for an application that I'm developing and just trying to get funding for this app. I'm an amazing presenter. I know how to communicate my idea. 3% of women get funded by VC companies. And it's even a lower percent of Black women. It's like 0.1%. So there is still a lot of work that needs to be done in this space. The only upside that I see is that the generation that holds on to these old values is dying. So with time, it's a breed that will die off. And And I'm saying this because I'm actually the president of a Rotary Club, Southwest USA. We've got an online club. The club was dying because it was predominantly male and white male. Rotary has been known for that. And they've realized that there will be no Rotary without women, without minorities, without females. And they're now on a drive to bring in more people of color, bring in more females. And I've grown our club tremendously in the last 3 months because I connect with people at so many different levels. So those who are recognizing the weakness in this male-dominated way of being are bringing in more females, but not enough at the level where change can really happen. They're not bringing in enough minorities, enough gay and lesbian people. It's still an issue. It definitely still is an issue. So there's a lot of work we still need to do in that space.
Charlotte, your question actually seemed to be depressing.
No, I don't mean to be depressing about it. I'm just saying we need maybe to change. I wanted to throw it a little bit out there that we need to change the narrative around it. Because when we call, and Therese and I have had this conversation a million times, that because when I first met Therese, I asked, "What, are you black?" I you know, just to provoke her a little bit, because I don't see color. I literally don't see races and colors. I lived in foreign countries my whole life. And I'm a little bit worried of the generation who've refused to see anything until it hits them personally. And that's really where I want to push the conversation a little bit, that we can have all these role models who stand up, who really push the envelope. And we all, we are here because we are trying to push that envelope. But I think we all need to realize that we might need to communicate a little bit differently with the generation who are out there now, who knows all the right words, but I don't know how deep it sticks them when it comes to it. And I think we have a task there where it doesn't become about fashion, but where it becomes truly about inclusion, no matter your color, your sexual orientation, the color of your shirt or whatever, where we are more understanding, where it goes wider.
I actually agree with you. And I would say, looking at the society, as Getrude mentioned, that education is key. Well, when you come to a society where education is even being questioned, say, for instance, in the United States, we have this issue that, critical race theory. Some people say, no, we cannot teach it. Get on with it is history. And articulating it the way you did is actually a good thing, because we have students who, when they go to school, they form their groups, they act in certain ways that are not honest. And if you don't understand that, that division actually deepens when people are not really addressing it. The guy that went to Buffalo and killed people because he felt like people are gonna be replacing white people. And that wasn't the guy, because some people inspired him. Some people infiltrated his mind and brainwashed him that this is actually what is happening. And he believed them. So when he did what he did, everybody just kind of snuck out because of cowardness. And some people call those who speak out the woke. That's their new word for those who speak out. And I will urge everyone to continue to speak out, because that's the only way.
Yeah, what it is, too, and I think that's what Charlotte is saying. It's like America has gone through, and you all have experienced it. Europe pretends it doesn't exist. And that's what the problem is. Like, Europe is like, we don't have an issue with race, which was highlighted when we had the Ukraine refugee crisis. We saw the different treatments Blacks got to it. But then to try to fix the problem, Gertrude, what they do is actually, what I say, will end up alienating Blacks and whites, because now they force it in the adverts. Every single commercial, the couples are mixed. It's a Black man and a white woman, or a white man. And then they've gone to the next step, right, Robert? They've gone to Robert. Now we see two women, one Black woman, one white woman kissing. So they're just trying to, and like the people now, so what we have is like the rebellion now saying it's too much in your face. Let it happen naturally, Gertrude. Like it will come there. And what we're saying, we see with these students on campus, I look at the students, my Black students all hang out together. And I said to them, I said, what's going on? They say, oh, the white students don't want to hang out with us. But to be fair, how are you going to go in? You are a Belgian white student, and they're Belgian Black students who have come across and grown up here, but all of them together hanging out. Like, you know, it's like a group of them and they don't want it. And when I talked to a girl, I said, let's mix you all. Y'all can date. No, I can't date white men. That will change my color. And they even told me I am no longer Black. That's why Charlotte laughed. My student said I don't qualify as Black because I'm married to a white man. I cannot understand what it's like to be Black. And I'm like, I do understand, because I experienced it when I first came to Belgium. I experienced everybody look, and people still do it. I love when I see some old people, like you said, the older generation. You should see how they still watch my husband and I. You know, and I sometimes just be naughty. I would go out without my wedding rings and told him, I said, and if they hearing me, I'll say, so does your wife know you're out with me? You know, I'm just having fun, okay? If they want to listen, let them think of it. Because, like I said, we go with the fun, and you just, Robert, I go. When I was a student in Canada, I was watching television, and someone said to me, you shouldn't be watching this show, because when you go back to your country, how are you going to see this soap opera? And I said to him, I said, well, when the cable is passing overhead, I run up the coconut tree and I see it. And he shook his head, and then I walked away. And I think it takes like, did she just mess me up there? But I was laughing my head off, you know, because they don't understand. But we have to be careful, Dr. Joseph, not to force it onto them either, because then that creates the problem. That's what happened with the gender. When we started to say you must have X woman. Yes, you must. My brother is a president of a bank, and he said he's trying his best to bring women up. But in Europe, what we see happening is a lot of the women are taking the 1 year vacation that is allotted to them, Gertrude, to be with their child. So they go off for 1 year. And as an employer, if you are employing 5 people and you have 5 women and all 5 get pregnant that year, you realize you have 5 women without a job, Charlotte. So those are some of the things we put in are also working against us in getting acceptance and doing stuff. We ourselves have to make sure, educate ourselves. That's what my mom said too. She was a teacher, daddy was a mechanic. She said, I can't give you money, but I will educate you to success. And we have done good enough. Not as good as you, Gertrude, you know? I'm just a lowly lecturer, but yeah. Not as good as you.
So I think what we're saying here is whether you're in the US or in Europe, there's not enough being done. There's a lot of lip service that has been put to this issue, but not enough tangible things are being done for diversity and inclusion and competency to actually play out. You're talking about your students separating. I work a lot with the refugee service in New Zealand. And what happens is they bring in these refugees. They are put in one geographic location and they speak the same language. They eat the same food. Initially, when they first come in, it's great because you have people who look like you around you. But what's happening is it's working against them because they're not assimilating the New Zealand culture. They're not learning to talk to other people who don't look like them. So I actually go in and I facilitate in bridging that gap to get people to assimilate the new home, the new culture. And what has happened is they get paid by social welfare. The more children they have, the more money they get. So there's no incentive to go to university, to go to college, to tap into the educational resources that the country offers. So they're now part of the lowest socio-economic group in New Zealand because they're not assimilating. And that's the same thing that's happening with your students. So it's great for us to hold on to who we are, be who we are, but also find ways of assimilating the culture that we immerse ourselves into.
Yeah, but the thing is, Gertrude, I mean, you don't know my past. My past was I was in politics for a short period, and I blame a lot on politics because I see that's why they do it. They're handing out to the refugees and keeping them secluded because if they keep people disjointed, then they control people. You know, and we need to, and that is why they do that. They keep them disjointed. They keep throwing money at them. They give, I mean, these people say it makes more sense to stay home, as you said, and have kids when they come here. Because for every child, they get 200 euros. Yeah. And then they don't spend the money here. They go and spend the money in Morocco or in Turkey, where it's cheaper to spend it. And they don't assimilate. And then when they turn 18, we have 18 years old, no education. They didn't take advantage of it. And now they're angry. And then that's how we see them, as the angry foreigners. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done there. I noticed Danielle put up her hand.
Mm-hmm. Hello, Gertrude.
Hey, how are you? Where are you? Let me know which country you guys are, so I know.
Yeah, I'm connecting in from Cameroon. I don't know if you've heard about Cameroon. It's found in Central Africa. So it's bordered to Nigeria.
Found that I'm 55% from Cameroon when I did my DNA test.
Amazing. Yeah, I must say that you have some good communication skills. And I mean, just to introduce myself, I'm Daniel and I'm from Cameroon and I'm presently in Douala, Cameroon, and I'm a social media marketer. I'm a founder and a CEO. I'm also a social entrepreneur. You know, I'm passionate about everything gender equality, everything helping millennials to empower them and to become their dream selves. You know, it really makes me happy to see how everybody is doing what he's always wanted to do. So when you were actually communicating, sharing about you, I was like, oh my God, how could I become like this lady? Because it seems like you've done everything, you've walked everywhere. And I was asking myself, like, if I was in her situation, how would I have done being working almost my lifetime with being the only Black in a company? I mean, that's what you said. Most of the companies you've worked in, you've always been the only Black. And I really see that challenge. Like, I started my business 2 years ago. And, you know, and my main objective was working with helping professionals and business owners in the US, because basically what I do is like I help business owners and entrepreneurs to build their brands online so that they can stand out as authority or expert in their niche and drive more sales specifically via LinkedIn. And one of the challenges I've encountered so far was like the way I communicate and trying to get working with clients in the US, in UK, and in Canada. So some people feel are very judgmental. I remember one day I got on a call with one guy in New York, and he said he thought I was in the US. So when he listened to my accent, he was like, he literally told me the truth, like he cannot work with me. And I felt very bad. I'm like, oh my God, does it mean that I shouldn't go for people in the US? I was like, you know how it feels when someone tells you, like, right in your face that he cannot work with you because of your accent, because you live in Africa, because you're an African. I don't know why he accepted in the first place to get on the call with me, but he told me that, and I was like, but what really comforted me was the people that have accepted to work with me, the white people in the UK and in US, they are white, but they have accepted to work with me because they found the value in me. But most of the time, I face the challenges because
can you get in a question, Danielle? Can you get in a question, please?
Yeah. So the question is, how can I put myself as as that lady? You know, I literally want to say that I would like to be like you, but what is the secret to having the confidence? Even though you work in these companies where you're the only Black lady, how did you handle all these judgment and people at times underlooking you or thinking that you're not competent? How did you handle that?
It's your belief system that helps you handle it. You know, like I told you, my parents instilled in me the belief that I could do anything I wanted, and I believed it.
Yeah.
So until you start believing it, you can't pass that on to anybody else. And the confidence is built with practice. Like I told you, my father would put me on a bus. Every school holidays, my friends would be playing and having fun. I had to apply for jobs just to practice, to talk in front of white people. So practice makes perfect. And in the beginning, it feels like you're wearing a new pair of shoes and it feels uncomfortable. And it feels icky. The second time you wear those shoes, they get more comfortable. The third time, the fourth time, you just have to keep doing it. And in handling rejection, especially the rejection from this man, you know, one thing you could have asked him is, have you ever had a Black friend? Because a lot of people who react like that have never had an experience, broken bread, had a meal with another Black person. This could have been an education opportunity for you to educate somebody who's never been exposed to someone like you. So the next time it happens, ask them for an opportunity to do whatever you do for them for free. Give them a week, a month's trial with you. Prove to them that you're worth what you say you're worth. Does that make sense? It's just another way.
Yeah.
You breaking the stereotype and helping somebody who thinks so negatively about people of African descent. It's an opportunity for you to educate. Even if you don't make any money, you could have said, take me on for free. Let me show you what I do.
Okay.
Because this is part of our job as people of African descent, is to educate people so people see us for what we are worth, what we are capable of.
Yeah.
And then celebrate those who celebrate you. All of those white people who have taken you on, know other people like them. Ask for referrals from them. Please refer me to 10 of your friends.
Okay.
They already love what you're doing. They already are in circles of people who act and think like themselves. That becomes your niche. So they say that when you sell anything, there's a 33% rule to selling. 33% of people will love you. They will worship the ground you walk on. 33% of people will hate you. Be prepared for the haters. Not everybody's going to like you. And 30% of people are indifferent. They just don't give a damn. So when you know who your niche is, the people that you love to work with, I wouldn't love working with a man who thinks of me like that. I wouldn't even take him on as a client. So who is your niche? Who do you want to work with? Then work isn't work, it's fun. You're engaging with people who think like you, who have the same belief systems as you, and you can do it 24/7. So decide who is my niche and go from there.
I think we have one more question. Let's switch.
Thank you so much.
Okay, lovely to meet you, Danielle. Find me on LinkedIn.
One more question.
Sure, thanks.
I think Charlotte is raising her hand. Okay. If Charlotte is not asking question, then I think we're gonna get back to our guest. This is just phenomenal. In spite of our technological problems, the number of people could not come in because they were not able to get in. But it was excellent. I mean, I can't even imagine the power of her message, her understanding of the generic examples that could resonate with anyone, which is something I think is very important for people who teach or try to educate people on diversity and inclusion. So Gertrude, I can't thank you enough. You were stellar, and we appreciate all you do. And with that, I will give it back to her if she have any final comment to make before we close this up completely.
I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. What I presented today is part of a book that I'm working on. It's called Ubuntu Leadership, where I infuse the Ubuntu principles in the workplace. It is a diversity handbook that can help any organization navigate this space. And to everybody who is listening to this video, those who are online live, thank you for being here. It's your participation that makes events like this a success. Please share this video in your communities. And if anybody listens to this video afterwards on LinkedIn or through social media, again, please help us share this content, because it's in the sharing of this type of content that we change the world, that we bring understanding, that we really start infusing the principles of diversity and inclusion in organizations worldwide. So thank you so much for having me on as a speaker.
I can't wait for that book to come out. Ubuntu is what I think the world needs, because if we abide by the principle of Ubuntu, I think we're gonna have a better world. So thank you so much, and thank you for coming, the audience. It has been a stellar performance.
And I would like you guys to just stay for a minute. This is Sumaya Khatun from Pakistan office, our Pakistan office. So there are basically two things. First, if you want to spend a little bit time with our amazing guests, Miss Getrude and Dr. Nwoye, for a few minutes after our official session and recording is ended, please do feel free. And the second thing is that I would like to just show you a clip, which is from Miss Getrude's TED Talk. And I would really want to see this 1 minute, just a clip from her TED Talk. Here it is. I'll share the link with you guys in the chat. I would recommend you guys to watch the full thing. So here it is. Give me a second. Here.
At a time. And I've got to thank my father for
I just want to make sure that everyone can hear it.
everything that he gave me. Vakandipa unu wangu, which means he gave me my humanity. He made me feel for people around me. Empathy, compassion, and connection are the superpowers that every single human being possesses. But it starts at home, where you put your family first, your community next. Then if you have something to spare, do something somewhere else in the world. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing.
This really resonates with me, so I definitely wanted to share it. Thank you so very much, Ms. Getrude. That was amazing. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
And thank you so much, Sumaya, for your having to help out, since Adam wasn't able to do it because of other things he has to deal with. So I'm very, very appreciative of your coming in and filling into the gap. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you this evening. All right?
You're always welcome, Dr. Nwoye. Thank you.
Right?
Thank you, everybody.